In this section, we'll begin looking at the entertainment industry, the recreation industry, specifically radio and magazines and the movies. Before the 1920s, people would retire after dinner to, say, the parlor, and they would sit around, maybe play music or read or just talk. In the 1920s, everybody had a radio, and so what they would do is they'd all huddle around the radio after dinner, listening to nationally syndicated radio shows. The new network comedy show, the enormously popular and somewhat mildly racist Amos and Andy, brought millions in sales to its sponsor, the Pepsodent Toothpaste Company. NBC's 1928 income was close to $100 million. The daytime shows were focused on women at home who would work and listen to the radio, and they began to have romantic comedies that were sponsored by the soap industry, and they became known as soap operas. When it came to reading, the 1920s was sort of the heyday of the urban newsstands. There was tremendous growth in mass circulation magazines and newspapers. In 1921, a husband and wife team, Lila and DeWitt Wallace, pulled their money and published the first issue of what they called Reader's Digest, a compact magazine that condensed articles that were originally published elsewhere. Because they'd been published elsewhere, they could get them cheaper, and the Wallaces sort of shortened them and put them in one volume. There are also a number of new magazines, like Time magazine. There were new mail order booksellers, like 1924's Book of the Month Club. By 1922, 10 American magazines boasted a circulation of more than 202.5 million each. Some trumpeted sex, crime, and quote-unquote true confessions, but others presented a mixture of fiction, cartoons, and stories. Probably the most famous was the Saturday Evening Post, which in the 20s began a series of covers with painters of everyday scenes. The painter became famous. His name was Norman Rockwell. The 1920s saw a lot of interest in fads, exciting experiences, all well publicized, sort of media events. In 1920s, for example, in 1924, a crossword craze swept the country, and of course, crosswords remain popular today. Going to the movies was kind of like going to the theater, and I've mentioned these new movie houses. Well, they were opulent. It's not like today when you've got Cinemark, 20 or something, and they're all the same. The theaters were status symbols for the city. There'd be a stage and a curtain, and there'd be ornate, decorations and boxes and balconies and comfortable leather seats. It was kind of like going to the theater. And they were named things like the Majestic or the Ritz or the Palace. What's interesting about the movie theater is that it was one of the earliest industries to recognize the importance of air conditioning, especially in the South. The air conditioning business was really promoted by a guy named Willis Carrier from New York, and the movie theaters saw it, the business, and they would air condition their theaters, so people would go into the theaters to get out of the heat and to sort of escape their lives for a while. Initially, of course, the movies were silent film, and they created such stars as the comedian Charlie Chaplin. There was the swashbuckling actor Douglas Fairbanks. One of the first sex symbols was Rudolph Valentino, who would make women blush with his portrayal of overt sexuality. For men, there were people like Greta Garbo, shown here in an outfit that looks obviously much different than what had gone in the Victorian age not long before. Movies recognized that sex and violence sell, but there was still family entertainment. There was the actress Mary Pickford, for example, who was marketed as America's sweetheart. Director Cecil B. DeMille won fame and fortune for his lavish biblical spectacles, The Ten Commandments in 1923 and The King of Kings in 1927. Sound came to the movies in 1927 with Al Jolson's The Jazz Singer. The introduction of sound transformed the who was a star and who was not. It created, for example, a new hero of the Western, Gary Cooper. By the way, color came to the movies in the early 1930s with The Wizard of Oz, which was a sort of a metaphor for the Great Depression. But if you're familiar with that movie, Dorothy from Kansas is in black and white, and when her house is thrown by a tornado, it lands in Oz, and when she opens a door, it's color, and it must have been quite the spectacle for somebody in the movie theater who'd never seen color before. A young cartoonist in 1928 named Walt Disney produced the first animated cartoon, Steamboat Willie, which introduced a mouse character named Mickey Mouse. By 1930, weekly movie attendance stood at nearly 80 million people. In Muncie, Indiana, 9 theaters ran movies continuously from 1 p.m. until 11 p.m., 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year. Like radio production, movie production soon became standardized. Hollywood giants such as Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer or Warner Brothers or Columbia Pictures, they turned out the majority of U.S. films. Predictable plots soon prevailed. Say in the Western, the good guy would always win. This concludes the sections on radio and magazines and movies in the 1920s culture.